Thank you everybody for attending today. So I'm going to talk to you more about Go Back Fetch It, what the project is, how I've started, how I was able to build out a world and a universe using augmented reality, the things that I drew from an artistic perspective, from a historical perspective, where it's going next, and where I see this being able to be used for educational potential, and where I see its place in the future of spatial computing as well. So the project is called Go Back Fetch It, and I'm using extended reality to challenge consensus reality. So who am I? Well, I had that amazing introduction. This photo was actually taken at the Harvard Semitic Museum, and that's one of the things that I'm doing is I'm bringing some of their reliefs to life there. Additionally, well, you already have the who I am. So Go Back Fetch It, it's a project about our shared origin stories and what makes us human. And when I originally conceived of this project, it was very different in its presentation. But the general idea that I really wanted to convey, and I realized was something that I've always wanted to do, is I wanted to be able to connect dots for people. I wanted people to be able to look at where they are standing currently and see not only all of the things that are happening around them, but see the connection from to the things that happened a long time ago, the connection to the things that happened on the other side of the planet, the connection to the things that seem like they're minuscule and not even a part of the conversation, or you're not even conscious of. And I think we've all heard of the term like the butterfly effect. You know, like there's a butterfly on the other side of the world that flaps his wings, and then a typhoon happens on the other side of the planet. And it's the reason that the term like that exists is because we are all interconnected, and everything is attached to everything else, and there's no such thing as anything that's siloed, and we're all a part of this web that's weaving together. And just because you're on this side of the web doesn't mean that a movement on that side of the web doesn't translate to where you are. And if that side of the web wasn't built first, then you wouldn't be here, you know, because it had to weave outward from the inward point. And so I always conceived of XR technology, specifically paired with data visualization and interactivity, and a rich human story at the center of it, as being able to collapse things down to a scale that's that's digestible, and to present the data and the information in an environment that's already engaging through art. So this story is told by the parable of Eve. And Eve is a woman on a journey that spans the entire arc of the human story. So starting from right when humans became human beings, and starting with the first major technological advancement, when humans discovered how to make fire. And what we're actually seeing is we're seeing her go through the struggles and the triumphs day in and day out as she's actually building the world to where we are now. And so at this point, what we're able to see is that we're able to see that even though something that happened, you know, hundreds of thousands of years ago, these people were quintessentially human beings. And even though when we, you know, look at these bones, or we go to a museum and we look at the way things were, we don't really connect to the fact that like these people were biologically human, like more or less their brains were the same. They were just dealing with circumstances that are so far outside of the realm of anything any of us could have possibly imagined, and they were figuring out how to make it work. You know, and I think that that's something that is absolutely beautiful. And if we were to take that knowledge and that mindset and keep it with us today, a lot of the problems that we see ourselves presented with, that we look at and we want to throw our hands up and say it's out of our hands and out of our control, if we were able to connect with our superheroine origin story and realize that, well, no, like once upon a time we didn't have tools and we didn't have fire, and we were, you know, being hunted by every animal that was out there, and now here we are sitting here in Santa Clara, California, making the future of augmented reality. There's nothing that we can't do. So the technology that we're using uses image-based augmented reality, and the way that it's presented is something that I found is supremely captivating to audiences. And I say this because I've seen people interact with augmented reality that's just kind of like standalone, where it's like, okay, you have like a 3D image, or like a 3D object that pops out on your phone. And I feel like in a sense that is something that's kind of commonplace, but I want to play a video for you of how people react when they've come in contact with my piece, and then I'm going to kind of go into why the reaction happens the way that it does. Could we hit play on the video? The last video? There's no way to, because that's an embedded video, there's no way to play the video. The last one. Yeah, the last slide. That one, yeah. Yep, thank you. Okay. Yeah, so that, everyone kind of like hopes to have that kind of reaction with their work, where people, like that situation was literally, I walked, there was this like local art thing that was happening. The mural pieces were there to be installed. I happened to walk in just as this group of volunteers from the Clinton Foundation read what it said, pulled out their phone, scanned it, and then I happened to catch them on video just as like pandemonium was starting to happen. And the reaction that I got from everyone was that like you have this kind of preconceived notion of like what an image is, right? Like you look at an image, you look at something that's static and like, oh yeah, we see pictures, we see art all the time, like whatever, you know? But then when you have that added layer of, oh, I can actually, you know, interact with it and something happens, and not just something happens, like, oh no, like a story is actually unfolding, a story is actually playing, and then it adds on all of this added context to it and really takes it into a realm that has been described to me as something that's actually quite magical. You know, it's like, it is something that even after you're done interacting with it, it's still persisting inside of the space, and the image itself is something that's already kind of evocative, and if it's well designed, it's already kind of has the ability to take you in the world to begin with. So on to the next, or I can, okay, and so this is the story section of the prologue. So if you could go ahead and hit play. This is the story that plays currently.
This is the story of a young woman living in a time
So I wanted to start by showing you that narrative aspect, and then I'll get to later the other aspects of it. But I wanted to show you the narrative first and foremost, because for me, when I originally conceived of this project, I'm going to tell you how I originally conceived of it. So, and then what I wanted the scope to be. So originally, I always considered this a data storytelling project that was going to be augmented reality. And so like the plan was I was going to get a tattoo on my stomach, and when you scan the tattoo, I was going to turn into a data visualization of a tree with different branches growing out of my head. And when you interacted with a piece of fruit on one of the branches, it would turn into this parametric data visualization, and then it would turn into this actual like anecdote about how that data point mapped to me as an individual. And so the data points that I was dealing with were the global impacts of the transatlantic slave trade. And so I was starting by starting to research the global impacts on everything or the economic impacts on everything from the fact that that was the first basis for long-term shipping. So all of the shipping routes that we use to this day, it was all kind of hammered out with people trying to figure out how to ship people out of Africa and how to get ships into it effectively. To if you look at the reason that the US is a first world country today is because it had hundreds of years of free labor. Or if you look at the fact that the major export of the United States is culture. And if you look at the actual influencers of culture, it is, it's African American people, it's Black people. And if you even think about hip hop music. So this is something that has become completely universal. I had this roommate who was from Bulgaria, and he was talking to me about Bulgarian rappers. And I've never met somebody from a country who doesn't have some form of rap music, and that's something that started in the Bronx in the 1970s because the descendants of slaves felt like they had to express themselves, and they just started expressing themselves in this way that completely took off and captured people all over the world and is still a major, major component of global culture to this day. And that is an art form that would not exist had African American people not invented it. And the same thing actually with rock and roll music. There was a woman who was just inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame last year. Her name is Sister Rosetta Tharpe. And she was a Black woman who was doing rock and roll music when Elvis Presley was in diapers. Elvis Presley actually cited her as one of his major influences. And if you pull her up on YouTube, your mind will be completely blown. It's crazy. There's this video of her, and she comes up on in a horse and a carriage, and she struts out on these train tracks, and then she picks up an electric guitar and just starts going to town. And it's the craziest thing you'll ever see in your life, and playing rock and roll music. And it's in black and white, of course. But it's just people look at, and if you look at where rock and roll music is to this day, that is something that never in a million years it would ever occur to you had an origin even similar to that. And so this project was all about connecting those dots. So when I started to actually start working on the project, though, and I was starting to do research, it occurred to me that anytime anybody ever talked about the continent of Africa, they would always start the story with slavery, when if you think about it, the entirety of the human race started way before that. And so it didn't really seem fair to me to start the story there. It seemed like if I had to start the story somewhere, I had to start it all the way in the beginning. And if I were doing that, then I wasn't just telling my story, I was telling everyone's story. And then the story got really depersonalized for me. And then it became about the human race. And instead of it being about me as an individual, I kind of ended up mythologizing the character of Eve and turning her into this kind of cutout that everybody could identify with, because she is everyone's mother, really. So getting to the actual world building aspect of it. Because when we're talking about using this type of immersive media, that's kind of the beauty of what we're doing. It's you have world building in movies, but it's we can actually do actual universe building here, and this entry point that you're starting with can go out expansively, and it could encompass everything. It could encompass every part of the universe around you, and every atom in it can be a way to layer in information and layer in data, and every piece of it can fit together into the cohesive whole of the story that you're trying to tell. And you can have the same ideas kind of recursing throughout the entire thing. And so the theme of recursion really recursed itself throughout the entire project. And so the world that I built was it had to have a thematic anchor that everything within the universe builds upon, and that serves as a contextual center point for the world. So the style elements that I used are, we actually shot it on a green screen. We filmed it in black and white. It looks like charcoal drawings. The graphics were developed using Adobe tools, and data visualization is a central theme of it as well. And I'm going to get more into the data visualization a little bit later on, but I just wanted to talk about the style elements at this point. So the ADINKRA symbols actually hail from Ghana, and they embody different aspects of humanity. And so there's a lot of different symbols that you can actually draw from for the project, or as we're going through it. And so they're more than just visuals within the world. They actually mark the point in the human journey in which our protagonist finds ourselves. So in the beginning of the story, or the project itself is based off of the symbol called the SANKOFA, and that means go back and fetch it. So it means we have to deal with the past before we can move into the future, and that actually appears in the trigger image. And these symbols build the world. They provide the context for her place in the journey. And so the world itself is built out of the Abedua, the palm tree, and the Dikrahene, the sun, that symbolizes charisma and leadership, because that was something that was very necessary in the beginning when humans were just figuring things out. So the adventure itself is told with the intention of accumulating the story of humanity from the beginning leading up until now. And the story itself is marking the evolution of the human race alongside the evolution of technology. And that serves for multiple reasons. So the first reason is, first and foremost, if we're talking about like the fact that we're at the beginning of this new technology and we're birthing a storytelling in this new medium, doing the story episodically is allowing the story to actually evolve as the technology continues to evolve too. So right now we're at the prologue. By the time we're at episode 5, obviously technology is going to be at such a point that we're not even there yet, that it could end up looking like anything. But aside from that, it's also marking the evolution of the human race alongside the evolution of technology. Because if you think about it, humans discovering how to make fire was the first technological advancement that had biological implications. Having constant access to cooked meat actually allowed our brains to develop at a faster rate. And then from there, a lot of technological advancements started happening one right after another almost. Another thing that's also really important to me in my work is to really demystify technology and show people that it's something that anybody is capable of. And when you realize that every step along the path of the human journey has always happened along the technological advancement at that point in time, we realize that it's not only a select subsection of human beings who are creating technology, it's something that we've all always done. It's actually our relation to technology and our interplay with it that makes us human. And as we continue to move forward, a lot of people have this view of technology where they think of it as something that's so far outside of us, or it's this bastion from the sky that's going to come down and it's being inflicted upon us. If we instead realize that it's a part of an interplay, and it's actually like it's always been, it's not something that's ever been separate from us, then we can completely reframe the conversation about it, because there are a lot of conversations that are talking about putting the humanity back in technology. And I think if instead we taught it from the viewpoint of it's never been separate, we're always together. People would go into creating it with the why already in mind, instead of people just building things and then thinking about the why later. Okay, so I'm going to get into the data visualization and then performance aspects of this project. So what you saw was the kind of story art anchor of it. From there, I see this as a way to build out a universe and a world that you can actually go into. So the image serves as a portal into this world. As you're watching the story, this world actually comes up and encompasses you. It crosses the barrier from from AR to VR, because you're completely immersed in the world. And then once you're inside of this world, you're presented with different information and data visualization. And from there, you can follow your own path to learning. And so I really see this as being able to be the anchor of art and storytelling for the Wikipedia of what XR could actually be. Can we go back to the slide? Yeah. So the first series of data points that I actually deal with are dealing with maps. And the first data points specifically are dealing with the fallacy of the Mercator projection and just how much it has impacted our view of the world, and almost on a really subconscious level. So a lot of people don't even realize this, but the map that we've been shown since kindergarten, the entire time we were going through school, is based off of something called the Mercator projection, and that's been used widely since 1569. And I actually have a short documentary here that I produced with the head of geospatial mapping at Harvard University that talks about it specifically. But what it actually has done is it's given us a really skewed view of actual landmass of the world. This map has taken everything that's on the equator and made it look smaller, and taken everything on the poles and made it look bigger. And so if you look here at the map, these are all of the countries that actually fit inside of Africa with room to spare. 11.73 million square miles. And so this is also data visualization and performance, human migratory patterns is another section of it as well. So these are the human migratory patterns according to National Geographic, the routes that people took to get out of Africa to where they actually ended up. And so I took that and I'm layering in performance aspects of that as well so that people can encode the information on a deeper level and actually are capable of connecting with what they're seeing. So here I actually put those two together, and so that's the two visualizations together, and incorporated with dance. And that was something that was kind of experimental at first, but then I realized it was something that was really resonating with people, and it's going to persist throughout the project. So, where's the, okay. Another thing this is another visualization that I've worked on and built out in augmented reality too. And it's something that lends itself really well to data visualization is being able to explore this data in a spatialized environment. So here you're seeing that the moon is 14.6 million miles, that Africa is 11.73 million miles, and that Africa is actually 80% of the size of the moon. So I made this visualization where I wrapped it around, and that's something that you can actually see persisting in space. You can move it around, and you can actually encode the information on that level as well. Okay, so another stylistic aspect, and something that really wove itself throughout the project, is the fact that if what we're talking about is go back, fetch it, right? And we're talking about going back to the beginnings. I realized if we're birthing storytelling in a new medium, then we should go back to the beginnings of storytelling in all mediums. And that's why it ended up looking the way that it does. So that's why it looks like charcoal and on cave drawings, because that was the beginnings of storytelling in written form. And also, if you think about it, cave drawings were the beginnings of immersive media, so that's something that's coming back full circle as well. Through mythologizing the story of Eve, it's also going back to the beginnings of oral storytelling, where everything was, very epic, and you had one character that was going on this epic journey through all of these different trials. And so you're seeing this play out with a superheroine origin story, and it's causing you to question a lot of things, like, what is a hero's journey? Why is it always a hero's journey? Why is it not a heroine's journey? What do we think of when we think of Eve? What do we think of when we think about the origins of the human race? I also drew from classic film. Here's that famous image from A Trip to the Moon by George Millet. Large, oversized props, captures childlike simplicity and wonderment, black and white. Those are the beginnings of film. And yeah, so this is just some more visual examples of what that looks like as well. Here it is. Okay, so if we could go, so this is the documentary that I produced with the head of geospatial mapping at Harvard. This is something that is incorporated into the next version of the prologue. So please play it.
Hi, I'm Charity Everett, and I want to talk to you about Go Back, Fetch It. Go Back, Fetch It is an augmented reality storytelling project about the history of the human race, told from the beginning, leading up until now, where you're following this heroine Eve, and she's going on this journey through the different phases and milestones of the human story, starting with when humans discover how to make fire. Now, one of the main themes of Go Back, Fetch It is getting people to challenge their preconceived notions. And one of the first ways that we're doing this is through examining the Mercator projection. The Mercator projection is a map that's been used widely since 1569. and chances are good it's the map that you were taught in school. Unfortunately, it's not very accurate, and it's given us an inaccurate view of the world. I had the opportunity of catching up with Bonnie Burns, the head of geospatial mapping at Harvard University.
It's about what the historical purpose of the Mercator projection is, and people have adopted it because historically that's what we had to do, that's what we had to work with. But people use it in a way that it was never intended. It's supposed to be used for navigation because it made straight lines.
The problem is when taking an object that is round, i.e. the Earth, and attempting to represent on something flat, i.e. a map, it has traditionally resulted in distortions, either in area or shape.
You start using it for other things without explaining the distortions that are in it, then there's not enough scholarly rigor in there. It leads to a misleading representation. I mean, that's all there is to it as far as I'm concerned.
The Mercator projection is guilty of a distortion that has sociological implications. It takes everything close to the poles and makes it look bigger, and everything close to the equator looks smaller. For instance, Greenland is shown as being roughly the size of Africa, when in reality, Africa is 14 times larger than Greenland.
Greenland on the globe it's not that big, and the first time you point it out to somebody, a lot of people are like, what? That's not what the world looks like. I like the quarter form myself, which is the heart-shaped one.
I haven't seen that one.
Oh, that's a good one.
Oh.
And you can center it on any line of longitude that you want. What you have, the circles are illustrative of the amount of distortion. So the quartiform is reasonably accurate along its central meridian. And then once you start getting out along the lines of latitude, it's less accurate.
This is amazing.
Thank you.
No, wait, you guys, wait. You were telling us.
I'm almost out of time. Okay. Okay. Okay, I just want to quickly touch on the educational potential. So storytelling is an essential component of any type of information recall. And if you actually think about it, we actually think in stories first and foremost. And that's why, when you were a child, when your parents wanted to teach you a lesson, they would tell you a fairy tale instead of telling you don't do this. And so by being able to layer in the information, the learning, and the data visualization, but doing it in rooting it in the story first and foremost, and allowing the person to kind of like follow their own path, it gives them the ability to feel really engaged in what they're doing. And being engaged and being able to get lost in the world, they're more likely to spend more time there and find as much information as possible. And so I see Go Back Fetch It as being the center point that you enter through which. And so right now we're talking about maps and we're talking about migratory patterns, but there's no reason why we couldn't start to layer in infinite amounts of information. And as the universe expands more and more, we could go up in scope a level from where you're not having just the human version of it, you're coming out, and now you're having the planet version. You can come out deeper, and then you can have the universal version, and you can go in deeper, and then you can end up on the microscopic level, and just kind of seeing how the same themes and patterns are playing out throughout them all, but then also through connecting together people's different projects that they're working on as well. Is this time that I actually have?
No, you have to 11.
Oh, okay, the counter went down to 0. Okay. And now it's not counting at all. Okay. What time is it? 10:35. Okay, great. Okay, so I can talk more about this then. So one of the next pieces that I'm actually perceive of for this project is actually adding in that data visualization portion of it on a deeper level. So you have the portion where the story plays, now you're inside of the world, you have the documentary. Once you're inside of it, you have these different projections that you can interact with, different maps. And as you're interacting with the different maps, you have a link that you can take out and you can go into a spatialized Wikipedia page, and then you can explore this information more and more. And then from there, I want it to turn into that visualization first of the first migration that we saw of humans leaving Africa, and then the second forced migration that happens out of Africa across the transatlantic slave trade. So we're compressing time that's going across as well. And then we end in present-day Brazil, which I'm connected with a filmmaker, a documentary filmmaker called Elisa Capet, and her project Espera Tua Revolta just won the Amnesty and the Peace Prize at Berlinale this year. And it's a documentary that was produced about this current uprising that's happening with the youth in Brazil, where they wanted to close down a bunch of schools there, and the youth decided to become very politically active. And the center, one of the central characters is this young woman named Marcela, who at the beginning of the story is 14, and by the end of it she's 19, and she goes through this entire transformation where she reclaims her African heritage, and she goes through a complete visual transformation as well through the end of it, and seeing that the character of Eve that you see at the very beginning of the story, who is this, discovering, how to even survive against, in the wild, and then who comes across in this data visualization as a part of the transatlantic slave trade, and boom, now she's in present day alive, and this young woman who's fighting this fight in current present day Brazil. And the plan is for this to serve as the anchor point and build out these WebXR-based pages into these different people's projects, and that serves multiple. One of the things that it can help is there are a lot of people who are working on impactful stories, whether it's documentary or it's interactive, where they show it, it maybe does a festival run, it maybe shows at the UN, and then after that it just kind of disappears, and what happens to it? These places don't really have a place to live and to continue to have impact. Through giving people a universe that they can enter and explore, and then from there find their way to these different people's projects in a way that's organic to them, gives them a place to live on forever. Aside from that, through connecting all of these things together and turning it into kind of a networked database, and especially doing it in an open sourced way, like using WebXR, it really has the ability to become a future version of spatialized computing that's rooted in history of the past, art, storytelling, that has the heart front and center of it the entire way. And so another use case for this is definitely being used a lot in museums. And actually, one of the things, I recently made a trip to Tunisia, and I'm going to be collaborating with the Ministry of Tourism there and using this technology to do the same kind of thing, where it's like I'm going to be going into all of these ancient artifacts that they have, whether it's these beautiful mosaics. This is Ulysses here. They also have the only visual representation of the poet Virgil, and that's a mosaic as well. And also, their work is also very, very geometric. So using XR, AR, VR to not only bring to life something as this is already something that's very rich. It's very visually rich. There's so much story there, but allowing the story to actually come to life and exist within the space, but then layering in that extra information about it, whether it's geographical information about the point in time when this was actually produced, information about just like what the connection was between Tunisia and Rome, because a lot of people don't even realize how much trade was happening between these two places during that point in time. A lot of people don't even realize that Carthage was inside of the country of Tunisia, which is, a lot of people I think that Carthage is in Spain or something like that, but or even the idea that like Tunisia is a place that exists inside of the continent of Africa. And actually, if you look at it, the name of the continent Africa came from a city that was actually inside of Tunisia, and the Romans were trading with it, and then they started calling the whole continent that, and that's how the continent got its name. But there's just so many misconceptions about it. So being able to use this technology as a way to tell these narratives that are a lot less known, because we kind of already have the pantheon in our head of the stories that, you know, we all know the Greek gods and the Roman gods, even though they have a really similar pantheon. But there's so many narratives out there that aren't being told, and that could even, you know, change our framework and our way of looking at things, even just like from a design perspective as well. Another thing that we're also doing is we're recreating the ruins of Carthage using AR as well, and using it as a way to bring people in by creating such things in VR. Yeah, so this is some of the geometric stuff as well that's really interesting to bring out into a spatialized environment. And that I really had shades of MC Escher when I was looking at some of this work, where it's like, it's kind of difficult maybe to see in an image, but when you're standing in front of it, like it does this thing where it's like the perspective keeps flipping and changing. And like if you think about the fact that, okay, these people were working thousands of years ago, right? So first of all, the fact that these artifacts are thousands of years old and they're even in this condition, like you'll be walking and then you'll look down and you'll look at these mosaics that are still like in full color and in pristine condition, and realize people have been stepping on this for 3,000 years. And how they can do that when we can't even build buildings that'll last for 100 years without maintenance is completely beyond me. But it's also the fact that they took something, a concept that was three-dimensional, they took these three-dimensional objects, turned it into something that was two-dimensional, and then recreated something that was 3D in it. Actually being able to use XR or AR to take that and extrude it out into the world around you and kind of put you into this, you know, MC Escher-esque place that's rooted in, you know, mosaics is something that's very compelling as well. More images from the Bardo Museum that I'll be able to play around with. Yeah, and that's pretty much the gist of what I have. I'm happy to take any questions if anyone has them, but thank you.